Millionaire pretends to be an employee to test his son's fiancée, and what he discovers leaves him shocked. The marriage proposal is the moment that transforms the life of Ethan Callaway, the young heir of one of Boston's wealthiest families. He chooses the city's most exclusive restaurant, a sophisticated venue illuminated by candlelight and offering a breathtaking view of the nighttime skyline. Grace Harrington, his girlfriend, wears an elegant blue dress that highlights her sparkling eyes. Ethan is visibly nervous but determined. He kneels before Grace, as the few diners nearby watch the scene with curiosity. "Grace, you're the woman who changed my life. I can't imagine a future without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Ethan's words are sincere and filled with emotion. Grace covers her mouth with her hands, clearly surprised and deeply moved. Her eyes fill with tears as she responds with a firm and heartfelt yes. The restaurant erupts in applause, and Ethan slides an impressive diamond ring onto her finger. Grace's smile is captivating, almost perfect, as she embraces Ethan, making it seem like this is the most important moment of her life. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. William Callaway, Ethan's father, is deeply moved when he hears the news. He had always wanted his son to find happiness, and Grace seemed like the perfect woman to make that happen. Grace's poise, elegance, and attentiveness had quickly won the family over. Margaret, Ethan's mother, was already envisioning the wedding preparations, brimming with excitement over the idea of hosting a grand celebration at the family's estate. But they had no idea of the dark secrets that were about to surface. Grace's first impression was always impeccable. From the beginning, she appeared to be the ideal daughter-in-law any family could hope for. Elegant and charismatic, Grace had an almost natural ability to make those around her feel special. At the Callaway mansion, she always arrived punctually, wearing a gentle smile and carrying herself with calculated grace. During family lunches, she complimented the dishes prepared by the chefs and asked thoughtful questions about William and Margaret's health, subtly earning their trust. Grace also knew how to interact with the household staff. To the Callaways, she seemed respectful and well-mannered, but her behavior shifted slightly when she wasn't under the family's watchful eye. One morning, while the housekeeper was arranging the main salon, Grace observed her for a few moments and discreetly made a sharp comment about the placement of the flowers. It was a small remark that might have gone unnoticed, but it left the housekeeper's hands trembling. Margaret adored Grace and often praised her kindness. "She's so refined, William," she said during a walk in the mansion's gardens. "Have you noticed how she always pays attention to the smallest details?" Ethan made a wonderful choice. William nodded in agreement, but an unspoken unease was beginning to stir within him. It was as though something about Grace didn't quite fit, though he couldn't yet pinpoint what it was. At social events, Grace shone brightly beside Ethan, embodying the role of the future Mrs. Callaway. Her flawless demeanor and engaging conversation captivated everyone. She had a way of making others feel small, but so subtly that no one could say for sure whether it was intentional or not. William began to notice small details. Despite her consistent kindness toward the family, Grace rarely made eye contact with the staff, and when she did, there was something in her gaze that seemed almost contemptuous. He brushed off these thoughts, attributing them to his own overcautious nature, but the unease lingered. The anonymous note arrived on a quiet morning, carefully folded and left on William's desk in the mansion's office. He immediately noticed the paper out of place, as he was meticulous and extremely organized with his belongings. Upon unfolding it, he found a brief message written in bold, firm handwriting with no signature. "She's not who she appears to be. Stay vigilant." The simplicity of the phrase hit like a stone cast into still waters, sending ripples of unease through him. William stood still for a moment, holding the note with steady hands. He looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the sprawling, well-manicured gardens as he tried to process what he had just read. He thought of Grace, How perfect, how impeccable she seemed. Could there be any truth to this message? Or was it just the envy of a disgruntled employee? The doubt gnawed at him. During breakfast, William couldn't take his eyes off Grace. She sat beside Ethan, animatedly discussing the wedding details. Her gestures were delicate, her laughter melodic, but now William noticed something he hadn't seen before. Everything seemed perfectly calculated. Every word, every movement appeared to have a purpose. Margaret noticed her husband's distant expression and asked if he was feeling well. William simply nodded, averting his gaze. He decided he couldn't share the note with anyone, not even Margaret. He needed to understand what was happening before raising any suspicions. Later, as he walked through the mansion, William began observing Grace more closely. He saw her interacting with one of the gardeners, who had brought fresh flowers to the main hall. Her voice was low, but the cold, impatient tone was unmistakable. As soon as the gardener left, she quickly returned to her charming smile upon seeing Ethan. That night, alone in his office, William held the note again, as though it were a piece of a much larger puzzle. He knew his wealth attracted ambitious and unscrupulous people, but he had never imagined that someone so close could pose a threat. Determined, he resolved to uncover the truth about Grace, even if it meant facing something painful for his family. A plan began to take shape in William's mind as he considered how to uncover the truth without alerting Grace. He understood that any misstep could endanger everyone, especially Ethan, who was completely in love and blind to any flaws. After a long night of reflection, William decided the best way to observe Grace was to get closer to her without revealing his intentions. He needed a disguise. The next morning, William announced that he would need to travel for a few weeks to handle business matters for the company. Margaret and Ethan didn't question it, as such absences were a normal part of his routine. What they didn't know was that instead of leaving town, William enlisted the help of a trusted employee to transform himself into Jack, a new hire brought on as a general handyman for the mansion. The disguise was simple but effective. He wore plain clothes, faded denim pants, and a shirt that would never suit his position as a magnate. A worn-out cap partially hid his face, and a pair of non-prescription reading glasses added an extra layer of anonymity. William practiced a light Southern accent to complete the transformation, and with the help of his confidant, he was introduced to the rest of the staff as Jack, the new handyman. Grace noticed the new employee but seemed largely uninterested in him. Her interactions with the staff were always curt and to the point, but with Jack, she hardly even bothered to look at him directly. This worked to William's advantage, allowing him to go unnoticed while observing everything. In the first few days, William stayed in the background, helping with everyday tasks around the mansion and paying close attention to every detail of Grace's behavior. He noticed that while she maintained a flawless smile in front of Ethan or Margaret, her expression would completely change when dealing with the staff. On one occasion, Grace harshly reprimanded a maid over a minor mistake in the arrangement of silverware. Her voice was cold as ice, dripping with disdain. The disguise not only allowed William to see who Grace truly was, but also brought him closer to the household staff. He began hearing stories of other incidents where Grace had been rude and domineering. However, these accounts still felt superficial, a stark contrast to her perfect facade, but not enough to justify the warning in the anonymous note. William knew he needed to dig deeper, convinced there was far more to uncover. The truth began to surface slowly, revealing sides of Grace that William could never have imagined. One evening, while assisting with cleanup after a dinner in the main hall, William heard faint footsteps and recognized Grace's voice on the phone. She was in a nearby corridor, seemingly at ease, believing no one could hear her. Quickly, William hid behind a heavy curtain, holding his breath as he listened intently. "I told you, you need to be patient. We're almost there," Grace said, her tone far more authoritative than usual. "Ethan is completely in love, and his parents trust me. Everything will be taken care of soon, William felt a chill run down his spine but remained perfectly still. Grace paused, seemingly listening to a response from the other end of the line, and then continued, this time with a sweeter, yet equally unsettling tone. "Yes, darling, I know. I'm anxious for us to be together too, but we have to do this carefully. Once we get the inheritance, it'll be just you and me. No Ethan, no one in our way." William nearly let out a gasp of shock but managed to cover his mouth in time. This was far worse than he had feared. She wasn't just manipulating Ethan. She appeared to have an accomplice in an even more sinister plan. His heart pounded so loudly that he was afraid Grace might hear it. After a few moments, she ended the call and walked into another room, leaving William frozen in a mixture of anger and disbelief. Back in the small room where he was temporarily staying as Jack, William sat on the edge of the bed, struggling to process what he had just heard. Grace wasn't just rude or deceitful. She was dangerous. The anonymous note had been a critical warning, but the reality of the situation was far graver than he had imagined. His family's safety was at stake. Over the following days, William intensified his surveillance, hoping to gather more information. He noticed that Grace seemed more alert than usual, as if constantly checking to ensure no one might uncover her secret. Her behavior toward the staff oscillated between indifference and bursts of anger, depending on her mood. Small contradictions began slipping into the stories she told Ethan, details that William's sharpened sense of distrust now picked up on easily. The tension was mounting, and William knew he had to act. The truth he was beginning to uncover was shocking, but an unsettling feeling told him there was even more hidden in the shadows. William decided it was time to take more concrete action. He knew he couldn't confront Grace directly without irrefutable evidence, but he also couldn't ignore the escalating danger. The phone conversation replayed in his mind, each word reinforcing the threat to his family. He needed help. That's when he remembered an old friend from his youth, James Carter, a renowned private investigator known for his skill in handling complex and discreet cases. The next morning, still disguised as Jack, William requested time off under the pretense of dealing with personal matters. He drove to a small cafe in downtown Boston, where he had arranged to meet James. When the detective arrived, William could barely contain the urgency in his voice as he explained the situation. James listened intently, jotting down key details. "You did the right thing by calling me, Will," James said, "but I need you to give me space to work. If she's really plotting something, we'll need solid evidence to act. This might take days, maybe weeks. Are you ready for that?" William nodded, though the waiting was eating away at him. He handed James everything he had on Grace, including dates, locations, and names she had mentioned during the phone call. From that point on, James launched his investigation, promising to keep William updated on any progress. Back at the mansion, William resumed his role as Jack, but now every interaction with Grace felt more charged. He watched her like a hawk, searching for any detail that could be useful. One afternoon, while helping organize the kitchen's pantry, he overheard Grace in the hallway discussing the weekend dinner with a staff member. It was a family gathering, and she insisted that everything had to be absolutely perfect. William couldn't shake the feeling that this event was part of her larger plan. Outside the mansion, James was following leads. He discovered that Grace had been renting an apartment in a discreet neighborhood in Boston. From there, he managed to photograph a man entering and leaving the location at various times. After several days of surveillance, James identified the man as Martin Blake, a known con artist with a history of fraud and extortion. James's first update brought a mixture of relief and terror for William. The confirmation that Grace wasn't acting alone only added to the gravity of the situation. But James also uncovered something even more alarming. Among Grace and Martin's phone records were mentions of chemical substances. Though the exact plan wasn't clear yet, James feared they were preparing something dangerous and possibly lethal. That night, William could barely sleep. The reality of the situation grew darker with every discovery, but he knew he needed to stay calm to protect his family. The weekend dinner was fast approaching, and something told him that this would be a pivotal moment. The days leading up to the weekend dinner were thick with tension. William, still disguised as Jack, kept his ears open for any new conversations or behaviors from Grace that might provide more clues. Her coldness toward the staff seemed to intensify, but whenever Ethan was around, she seamlessly slipped back into her perfect facade. To William, it felt like watching a carefully rehearsed play, where every gesture and word of hers was meticulously calculated. Meanwhile, James was making strides in the investigation. He managed to access messages exchanged between Grace and Martin, and what he found was chilling. The messages outlined a plan to poison William and Margaret during the dinner, using an odorless substance mixed into the food. They had chosen this event because it would appear to be a tragic domestic accident, diverting suspicion away from Grace. After Ethan's parents were dead, Grace planned to manipulate him into transferring control of the inheritance to her before disappearing with Martin. James relayed the information to William in a brief and urgent phone call. The detective's voice was heavy with concern as he detailed the scheme. William felt as though the ground had fallen out from under him. He had always known Grace was a threat, but hearing the cold, calculated details of her plan made her seem more sinister than he had ever imagined. It was as though she were playing a game of chess, moving her pieces with precision and calm, utterly indifferent to the lives she was destroying in the process. With the evidence gathered, James suggested contacting the police immediately. William agreed but wanted more than just Grace's arrest. He wanted her exposed in front of everyone, especially Ethan. It was crucial to unmask her publicly so there would be no doubt about who she truly was. James contacted the authorities, who agreed to organize a discreet operation to ensure the Calloway family's safety throughout the process. On the day of the dinner, the atmosphere at the mansion was both festive and strangely tense. Grace was impeccably dressed, overseeing the final details with a smile that appeared genuine to everyone, except William. He knew that behind that smile lay a dark plan in motion. Every move she made was closely watched by William, who understood that this would be the day of reckoning. Shortly before the dinner began, William shared a brief moment with Margaret. She commented on how perfect Grace seemed and how happy she was with Ethan's choice. William forced a smile, knowing the truth would soon shatter her world. Ethan, meanwhile, was glowing with joy, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding in secret. As the guests took their seats, William scanned the table, taking in every detail. He knew this would be a pivotal moment. With the police stationed outside and James monitoring closely, everything was about to change. The dinner began with an air of normalcy, which only heightened William's internal tension. He observed Grace's every move like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Beside him, Ethan appeared relaxed, chatting about honeymoon plans. Margaret, always attentive to details, praised the table's flawless decor, oblivious to the mortal danger hidden beneath the evening's polished veneer. Grace, playing the role of the perfect hostess, made sure to compliment the dishes and pour wine for the guests with an unsettling calmness. When the main courses were served, William noticed a quick glance she exchanged with the maid responsible for bringing the serving platter to the table. It was a subtle gesture, but to him, it was a clear signal. Her plan was about to unfold. Realizing he could wait no longer, William cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. He rose to his feet, and the room fell silent. Grace looked at him with a polite smile, but he could see the stiffness in her posture, as if she sensed something was amiss. Before we continue this dinner, I believe it's time to bring some truths to light, William began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Grace, is there something you'd like to share with the family? Grace's smile faltered for a brief second before she quickly regained her composure. She responded with feigned lightness. I'm not sure what you're talking about, William. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan looked back and forth between them, confused. Margaret, still not understanding what was happening, began to ask a question, but William interrupted her, pulling an envelope from his pocket containing the evidence James had gathered. He placed it on the table without ceremony. "Perhaps this will jog your memory," William said, staring directly at Grace. "Recorded conversations. Message exchanges with a man named Martin Blake. The plan to poison us during this dinner." Ethan gasped, unable to believe what he was hearing. Margaret clutched her chest, stunned. Grace froze for a few seconds, but her facade soon began to crumble. She made one last attempt, laughing nervously. "This is ridiculous. A setup. You're accusing me of something horrible without real evidence." At that moment, as if he had been waiting for this exact cue, James Carter entered the room accompanied by two plainclothes officers. One of them carried a small vial that had been discovered in the kitchen during the discreet operation conducted just minutes earlier. "I believe this belongs to you, Grace," James said firmly. "Chemical substances, ready to be used." Grace's expression turned to pure panic. She tried to stand, but the officers were already positioned to block any escape. Ethan rose to his feet, staring at her with eyes filled with pain and disbelief. "Grace, all of this, is it true?" His voice was barely a whisper, heavy with sorrow. Grace looked at him, her mask finally shattered. For a moment, it seemed like she might beg for forgiveness, but instead, she let out a desperate confession. "You'd never understand. I deserve more than this hollow life you all cling to." The officers cuffed her as Ethan stood frozen, unable to process what had just unfolded. Outside the mansion, Martin, Grace's accomplice, was also apprehended, completing the operation that finally dismantled the sinister plan. The night of the dinner would remain etched as a painful turning point in the Calloway family's lives. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur and security, now felt heavy with silence. Ethan locked himself in his room, refusing to speak to anyone. William tried to talk to him, but the only response he received was a muffled plea to be left alone. Margaret, still in shock, struggled to accept that a woman she had welcomed so warmly could be capable of such a cruel plan. She wandered the halls like a ghost, lost in her thoughts. When she finally sat down in the living room beside William, her voice was barely audible. "How did we not see it, Will? She was here with us, and none of us saw who she really was," Margaret said, her voice heavy with disbelief. William held her hand, trying to offer some comfort, but the truth was, he was wrestling with his own guilt. He felt responsible for not acting sooner, for allowing Grace to get so close to tearing their family apart. Meanwhile, Ethan was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. He spent hours staring at the engagement ring he had chosen so carefully, haunted by memories of promises and moments that now felt like a cruel lie. The pain of betrayal was almost unbearable. He hadn't just lost the woman he loved. His trust had been shattered in a way that felt irreparable. The next morning, William decided to visit his son, determined to break through the wall of silence Ethan had built around himself. When he entered the room, he found Ethan sitting by the window, gazing blankly at the horizon. William sat beside him, saying nothing for a few minutes. "I know it hurts," William finally said, his voice soft. "I watched everything fall apart last night. There's nothing I can say to make it hurt less." Ethan sighed but didn't look at his father. "I feel like a fool, Dad. She tricked me. I really believed she loved me." William placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That doesn't make you weak or foolish, Ethan. It just means you believed in the best of someone. And that's not a flaw." The two sat in silence, sharing their pain in different ways. It was a moment of mutual understanding, even though few words were spoken. As the days passed, Ethan gradually began to emerge from his shell, though he still carried the weight of his disappointment. He avoided places that reminded him of Grace, steering clear of memories that continued to haunt him. William and Margaret gave him the space he needed, but they were always nearby, ready to support him when he was ready. Slowly, the mansion began to return to its routine. The staff, who had been victims of Grace's hostility, finally seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The atmosphere, though still marked by trauma, started to show signs of healing. Ethan's journey to recovery was slow and tentative. He spent long hours wandering through the mansion's gardens, avoiding the places he used to share with Grace. The light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a melancholy that deeply worried William and Margaret. Yet they understood that he needed to confront this pain in his own time. One particularly quiet afternoon, Ethan was walking near one of the garden's fountains, lost in thought. The sound of the cascading water was almost hypnotic, and he wondered if he would ever be able to trust anyone again. But then, something interrupted his contemplation. A subtle movement in the distance caught his attention. He noticed a young woman crouched near a flower bed, carefully inspecting the plants. She wore simple, comfortable clothes, but there was a grace to her movements that immediately caught Ethan's eye. He stopped for a moment, watching her without being noticed. The woman, seemingly engrossed in her work, adjusted her glasses and began jotting notes into a small notebook she held. Curious, Ethan approached her, maintaining a polite and calm tone. "Are you new here?" The woman stood up slowly, surprised, but greeted him with a friendly smile that lit up her face. "Oh, hello. Yes, I'm Lily Carter, the landscaper. I'm here to tend to a few details in the garden. I hope I'm not intruding." Ethan felt a warmth in her words that he hadn't expected. There was something different about Lily. She seemed authentic, without any pretense. "Not at all. It's always nice to see the garden being taken care of. You seem to know exactly what you're doing." Lily laughed, a soft and spontaneous sound. "I'd say it's passion. I've always loved working with nature. Plants don't lie, you know? They show you exactly what they need." Lily's simple response struck a chord in Ethan. There was an honesty in her that felt refreshing, like a cool breeze after a suffocating storm. The two continued talking for a few more minutes, and Ethan realized he was smiling for the first time in weeks. In the days that followed, Ethan found excuses to visit the garden while Lily worked. At first, he told himself it was to check on the progress of the landscaping, but he soon realized it was her presence that drew him in. Lily was unlike anyone he had ever met, strong, resilient, and deeply passionate about her work. She seemed to radiate a positive energy that enveloped him. Gradually, Ethan began to share pieces of his life with Lily, though he avoided mentioning Grace or what had happened. Lily, in turn, spoke about her business, the challenges of being an entrepreneur, and how she found inspiration in the beauty of simple things. For the first time since the disaster with Grace, Ethan felt like he could see a new path ahead of him. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Lily's connection began to deepen. The mansion's garden, once a place Ethan avoided because of the painful memories it held, became a sanctuary where he found solace and, slowly, hope. Lily wasn't just a pleasant presence. Her infectious energy made Ethan feel lighter, even as the shadow of his past continued to linger. On a sunny day, as Lily adjusted the placement of some flowers near the fountain, Ethan approached with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I thought you might need something refreshing," he said, handing her one of the glasses. Lily accepted with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron before taking the drink. "You read my mind. This heat is unbearable today." They sat on a nearby bench, and Ethan watched Lily as she gazed at the garden, evaluating every detail as if she were looking at a blank canvas being brought to life. "You really love what you do, don't you?" he asked, curious. Lily nodded, taking a sip of her lemonade. "I do. I think nature has a way of teaching us lessons that people sometimes can't. For example, even when a plant seems to be dying, if you take good care of it, it can bloom again." Ethan was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He realized Lily wasn't just talking about plants. "I think I know what that's like," he finally said. "It's been hard for me. Finding a reason to move forward after everything that's happened." Lily looked at him, her expression full of understanding but without a hint of judgment. "I don't know exactly what you've been through, Ethan," she said gently, "but I can tell you're on the right path. I can see it in you. You're starting to bloom again, even if you don't realize it yet." Her words touched Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, he felt understood by someone without needing to explain all the weight he carried. As the days went on, Ethan began inviting Lily on outings outside the mansion. They strolled through parks, talked about movies and books, and even visited a greenhouse where Lily showed him her favorite plants. Slowly, he felt his emotional armor beginning to dissolve, allowing a new and genuine feeling to take root. One evening, during a casual dinner at the mansion, Lily mentioned a landscaping project in a local community that needed help revitalizing a small park. To his own surprise, Ethan volunteered to help. "I don't know the first thing about gardening, but maybe you can teach me," Ethan said. Lily laughed. "I accept the challenge. Who knows? You might discover a hidden talent." Although it was just a small promise, that gesture represented a significant step for Ethan. He was finally allowing himself to look toward the future with optimism, and Lily was the light guiding him on this journey. The park revitalization project became more than just a simple commitment for Ethan. It became a symbol of renewal. For months, he had been trapped in pain and disappointment, but now he found purpose in each day spent alongside Lily and the community they were helping. At first, he could barely tell an ornamental plant from a weed, but Lily was a patient teacher. Her passion for her work was so contagious that Ethan soon found himself eager to learn. "It's not just about putting plants in the right place," Lily explained as they prepared the soil. "It's about creating something that will last, something that will bring people joy." Ethan watched her as she worked, realizing that her words carried an even deeper meaning. It wasn't just the park that Lily was helping transform. She was also helping heal Ethan's wounds, even if she didn't realize it. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan began to learn more about Lily's life. She spoke with pride about how she had built her business from the ground up, overcoming challenges that had tested her resilience. Her story of determination inspired Ethan, who started to wonder if he could also find a new purpose in life. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a tree in the park, Ethan shared something he had been holding back. "I don't think I've ever thanked you for all of this," he said, looking at Lily. "Not just for the park, but for showing me that there are still good things in the world." Lily looked at him, surprised, but smiled warmly. "You did this for yourself, Ethan. I was just here to remind you that you still have strength." He realized she was right. For the first time in a long while, he didn't see himself as a victim of Grace's betrayal, but as someone rebuilding his life. The weight he carried felt a little lighter, and it encouraged him to keep opening up to Lily. Later, as they walked together through the quiet streets of the town, Ethan began to open up about what had happened with Grace. He spoke of the pain, the shame, and the struggle to trust again. Lily listened attentively, never interrupting. "You've been through a lot, Ethan," she said when he finished. "But you know what I think? I think it's made you stronger. You didn't let that pain define you." Her words struck something deep within Ethan. He realized there was truth in them. As much as Grace had tried to destroy his life, she hadn't succeeded in taking away the core of who he was. In the days that followed, Ethan began actively participating in other community initiatives, something he never would have imagined doing before. The positive energy Lily brought into his life seemed to ripple outward, transforming him into someone more confident and open. The relationship between Ethan and Lily reached a new level of intimacy and trust. The work on the park was completed successfully, and the local community celebrated with a small opening event. Initially hesitant to attend, Ethan was convinced by Lily to come along. When he arrived, he saw something that filled him with pride. Children playing in the revitalized spaces, families strolling among the blooming flower beds, and the sound of laughter filling the air. He realized that this seemingly simple project had a far greater impact than he had imagined. During the event, Lily was surrounded by grateful people, praising the work she had done. Ethan stood off to the side, watching her interact with the same grace and authenticity that had always impressed him. When their eyes finally met, Lily gestured for him to come closer. "Don't just stand there, Ethan. This success is yours too." He laughed, shaking his head. "No, this is all you, Lily. I was just lucky to be a part of it." She smiled, but her gaze carried something deeper. "Maybe, but you're more than just an observer now. You were part of the change." Later, as they walked back to the mansion, Ethan felt it was time to take an even bigger step. They stopped in a clearing in the garden, where the sky was clear and the stars sparkled like lanterns suspended in the vastness above. "Lily, can I ask you something?" he said, breaking the silence. She nodded, curious. "Of course, what is it?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like to build something bigger? Something more than just work?" Lily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I think you're talking about something more specific than a park." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I mean building a life. Something that's not just about what we do, but about who we are and who we want to be." Lily remained silent for a moment, processing Ethan's words. Finally, she stepped closer, gently taking his hand. "I've thought about it too, Ethan. And honestly, I think we're both on the path to figuring that out together." The connection between them was palpable, as if the moment confirmed everything they had been building together up to that point. In the days that followed, Ethan began making more concrete plans for the future. He spoke with William and Margaret about his desire to explore opportunities beyond the family business. William, though surprised, was proud of his son for finally taking control of his own story. Meanwhile, Lily continued to be a source of inspiration for Ethan. They began working on more community projects together, combining their talents to make a meaningful impact. Their trust and partnership grew stronger each day, and Ethan felt like he was finally creating something real and lasting. Their relationship deepened, but with that closeness came challenges that would test the strength of their bond. One morning, while walking around the mansion grounds, Lily received a phone call that visibly shook her. Ethan noticed the immediate change in her expression but chose not to press her at the time. Later, as they sat under the shade of a large oak tree in the garden, he decided to ask gently, "Lily, I noticed that call upset you. Is everything okay?" She hesitated for a moment, staring at the ground as if searching for the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath and answered, "It was about my business. I'm facing financial trouble. A big project we were counting on fell through, and it's left me with few options." Ethan frowned, feeling a pang in his heart as he listened. He knew how dedicated Lily was to her work and how much her business meant to her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Lily shrugged, a sad smile on her face. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix this for me. This is something I need to overcome on my own." Ethan respected Lily's independence, but he couldn't ignore the desire to help her. He spent the next few days reflecting on how he could support her without undermining her autonomy. Meanwhile, Lily continued working tirelessly, searching for solutions to save her business. One evening, during a family dinner, Ethan shared what was happening with William and Margaret. His parents listened intently, and William offered an idea. "Maybe we could hire her for a larger project at the mansion. Something that wouldn't just help her financially, but would also showcase her talent." Ethan loved the idea but knew he would need to approach it delicately to avoid making Lily feel pressured. The next day, he met her at the park where they had worked together and brought up the idea. "Lily, my father and I were thinking about expanding the landscaping at the mansion. Something big, something that reflects your vision. What do you think?" Lily was surprised, but there wasn't a hint of pity or obligation in Ethan's words. He genuinely believed in her work, and that meant a lot to her. "Do you think it would help?" she asked, trying to hide the glimmer of hope starting to bloom within her. "I think you'd create something amazing," he replied with a smile. "And honestly, I can't think of anyone better for the job." Over time, the project began to take shape, not just as a financial solution for Lily, but as a collaboration that brought the two of them even closer. Ethan saw the sparkle return to her eyes, and Lily felt grateful to have someone by her side who believed in her talent and strength. The Callaway Mansion's landscaping project became a true work of art in progress, and each step seemed to deepen the bond between Ethan and Lily. They spent hours together planning every detail. Lily brought her ideas with renewed enthusiasm, while Ethan, still a novice in the field, offered suggestions that surprised even himself. One afternoon, as they stood overlooking the area where a large communal space surrounded by a rose garden would be built, Lily paused to take in the view. "I never imagined I'd get the chance to create something this meaningful in a place like this," she said, her smile a blend of pride and gratitude. Ethan, standing beside her with a map of the project in hand, looked at her. "You deserve this, Lily. And honestly, I don't think anyone else could create something as amazing as what you're doing here." She laughed softly, glancing away for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "You always seem to say the right things, don't you?" Ethan smiled, but there was something more serious in his eyes than usual. "It's not about saying the right things. It's about believing them." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding between them. As the project progressed, so did their relationship, growing naturally like a plant finding fertile soil to thrive. One starry evening, the sky above them sparkled like a blanket of diamonds, and the garden, illuminated by the gentle glow of newly installed lanterns, radiated a magical serenity. Ethan's heart raced as he walked beside Lily, each step filled with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. It was now or never. He stopped, taking a deep breath to steady himself, and turned to face her. His voice, initially hesitant, carried a sincerity that made it impossible to look away. "Lily, ever since you came into my life, everything has changed." He paused, as though ensuring she felt the weight of his words. "I felt lost, without direction. But you brought something into my life that I didn't even know I needed." Lily stopped too, surprised by the intensity in his tone. The lantern's soft light reflected in her eyes as she looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Ethan." Her voice came out low, almost a whisper, filled with meaning. He didn't back away. Instead, he stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his, intertwining their fingers as if to offer her reassurance. His touch was warm, carrying a silent promise. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to figure it out with you." His words were laden with deep, almost tangible longing, and Lily's heart seemed to echo his accelerated rhythm. Her eyes glistened, brimming with emotion, and a shy but affectionate smile spread across her lips. "I feel the same way, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling yet steady. "From the beginning, I knew there was something special about you." For a moment, everything fell silent. It wasn't an empty silence, but one filled with meaning, where the world seemed to pause just for them. The soft aroma of the surrounding flowers enveloped them, and the gentle night breeze caressed their faces. Then Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes dropped slowly to her lips, and she, almost instinctively, did the same. With an almost reverent delicacy, he raised a hand to touch her face, his fingers gliding softly along the curve of her cheek. Every movement carried immense care, as if she were too precious to rush. When their lips finally met, it felt as though the world exploded in invisible colors. The kiss began hesitantly but quickly deepened, filled with passion and surrender. Lily responded with equal intensity, lightly gripping his shirt as if to hold on to the moment and ensure it wouldn't slip away. It was more than a kiss. It was a promise, a silent declaration that they were ready to face everything together. When their lips finally parted, the world around them seemed different. Both were breathing heavily, and for a few moments, neither spoke. It was as though they were still absorbing the intensity of what had just happened. Lily kept her gaze locked on Ethan's, feeling the warmth of his hands still holding hers. A soft, almost involuntary smile curved her lips. She tried to say something but laughed lightly, lost in her emotions and words. Incredible, Ethan finished, his voice low but filled with conviction. He couldn't hide the sparkle in his eyes. As if to reaffirm everything they had just shared, Ethan lifted one of Lily's hands to his lips and placed a gentle kiss on it, keeping his eyes fixed on hers. It was a small gesture, but one laden with meaning. Lily felt a shiver run through her body, and without thinking, she stepped closer, wrapping her arms tightly around him. The feeling of his arms around her, firm and protective, made her feel as though there was no safer place in the world. They stayed like that, enveloped by the distant sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the faint murmur of nature around them. The connection between them was almost tangible, like an invisible thread that bound them together in an undeniable way. Both knew this moment marked the beginning of something extraordinary. In the days that followed, the garden began to take its final shape, but what truly grew there was something deeper, the trust and love between Ethan and Lily. For both of them, this was more than just work or a budding romance. It was a second chance to build something real and lasting. The mansion's garden was finally complete, and the result was breathtaking. Winding paths lined with vibrant flowers led to serene rest areas where fountains and sculptures blended seamlessly into the environment. At the heart of it all was a large pergola draped with climbing vines, creating a romantic retreat that had become Ethan and Lily's favorite spot. The project had not only revitalized the physical space, but had also transformed the lives of everyone involved, especially Ethan's. The Calloway family hosted an event to celebrate the completion of the garden, inviting close friends and members of the community who had contributed to the initiative. The evening was perfect, with a clear sky and stars shining brightly as if blessing the occasion. Delicate lanterns hung from the trees, softly illuminating the space, while live music played in the background. Lily, wearing a simple yet elegant dress, walked among the guests, graciously accepting compliments for her extraordinary work. Ethan watched her from a distance, a smile on his face that reflected both admiration and affection. He knew this was the perfect moment to take the next step. He had planned something special, something that symbolized not only his love but also the journey they had shared. As the party reached its peak, Ethan called for everyone's attention. He stepped onto a small stage set up in the garden, microphone in hand, as the guests gathered around. Lily, confused but intrigued, stood at the front of the crowd, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate something that goes beyond a garden. This represents new beginnings, growth, and, above all, hope." The crowd applauded, and Ethan paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But today is also special for another reason. Lily Carter, from the moment you walked into my life, everything changed. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, there is beauty to be found and reasons to keep going." He stepped down from the stage and walked toward Lily, who was visibly moved. When he reached her, Ethan knelt down, pulling a small ring from his pocket. "Lily, you are the person who brought light to my darkest days. You've taught me the true meaning of love, partnership, and trust. So here, in this garden we built together, I want to ask you, will you marry me?" The crowd fell silent for a moment, and then Lily, with tears in her eyes and a radiant smile, answered, "Yes, Ethan. Yes, I will." Applause echoed through the garden as Ethan slipped the ring onto Lily's finger before standing to embrace her. They shared a deeply emotional kiss while the crowd erupted in celebration around them. For Ethan and Lily, that moment wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter. It was a confirmation that, together, they could face anything. In the days that followed, the Calloway mansion buzzed with preparations for the wedding. William and Margaret, watching it all with pride, felt immense gratitude to see Ethan finally happy and at peace. The wedding was held in the very garden that had become a symbol of the love and renewal Ethan and Lily had found together. Under the same pergola they had designed, surrounded by blooming flowers and the warmth of friends and family, they exchanged heartfelt vows. They promised each other a life filled with love, honesty, and mutual growth. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.